and welcome to number 7 in our Wellbeing Insights series on building immunity. This with myself, Sue Jones. I'm a Director of Wellbeing at We Are Wellbeing, and today going to give you an introduction into immunity, what the first line of defence is within the body and the second line of defence within the body, and then looking at ways of how you can sustain or build your immunity. Okay, so as ever, our aim at We Are Wellbeing is to create a place where people can thrive, and it goes without saying that immunity allows people to do that, because a good functioning immune system is going to mean that you're poorly and off work less frequently, so you're more enabled to do your job more effectively and efficiently. Okay, so an introduction to immunity. So what is immunity? So immunity is a state or quality of being able to resist a particular disease. So that's either not getting a disease or illness in the first place, or being able to combat it if you do get it. So in our world, we have a lot of pathogenic microorganisms. So these are disease-causing little living things. So like a lot of medical terminology, this word derives from the Latin, so patho meaning disease and genic meaning born of, so something that's born of disease. And then a microorganism, so something that's really tiny, you can't see with the blind eye, something you have to see through a microscope. And these little microorganisms, as such, depicted on the right hand side on the diagram there. An example of these ones are viruses. I know from years of looking at medical textbooks and years of looking down microscopes that this is what a virus looks like. And all these different types of pathogenic microorganisms, of which there's bacteria, fungi, parasites, viruses obviously, pose a threat to our health. And our immune systems are something that we've evolved to have more and more over time, and they do our best to protect us from that. So on this slide, I thought it would be helpful to mention as well about the importance of vaccinations. So there's some really nasty illnesses and diseases out there that we're lucky to have antibodies for, which are little Y-shaped proteins that enable our bodies to combat disease, and we'll look into those later. And what these vaccinations do is they either give us a form of these antibodies so that we've got them within our body, or they give us what's called an attenuated version, so a weakened version of something, like flu jab, for instance, can be that form. Or they can even be dead versions that still have these little antigens, which are these little proteins on the surface that elicit an immune response within the body. And so even though they're not alive in that form, or they're weakened in the attenuated form, they still cause us to create the antibodies to them, but without making us really ill in the process. So there's a number of ways that could be helpful. So some of the nasty diseases, there's meningitis, there's measles, mumps, rubella, tuberculosis, smallpox, all of these things that we've done really well to eradicate from our country and our population. Largely anyway, there are small outbreaks where people aren't immune. For instance, tuberculosis sometimes happens at universities where there's a lot of foreign students and things that come over that don't have the same vaccination programs as what we have, so there can be outbreaks. So really important to make sure initially in an introduction to immunity that you have got all your vaccinations to date. Okay, so the first line of defence, really a lot often goes forgotten, but what happens when we go about our day-to-day lives is where we encounter a lot of different pathogenic substances, so these disease-causing substances. And as the photograph on the right shows, a diagram on the right shows, how we can have a barrier to that, literally without getting any signs or symptoms of that whatsoever. And that's because we've got a number of barrier mechanisms within our body that now allow us to not let these substances get into us. So first and foremost, we've got our skin, which is the largest organ in our body. that creates that protective barrier all around our body to stop us anything intruding into our bodies. So we know that if we scratch the surface of our skin, then quite quickly, if we scratch kind of hard enough, that there be like a scab will form quite quickly. That as soon as possible, we'll have an immune response to that. Sometimes we'll get a release of histamine at the site, which is what makes it go red and sore, and then you get a build-up of white blood cells to the area that will fight any infection. And that's why sometimes, if you've got a splinter or something, you can actually see on your skin a white area around the splinter itself, and that is actually the accumulation of white blood cells. So that's our skin barrier. We also have hair, so that stops bacteria and other substances building up on the surface of our skin. We have little hair-like substances called cilia that line our airways, our upper respiratory tract, and what they do is they act as little hairs, and they actually catch lot of bacteria and viruses in them, coupled with mucus that we produce, helps us to catch these things before they infiltrate down into our lungs. So that's a good first defense mechanism there. We also have tears and saliva, so they contain an enzyme that actually kills a lot of bacteria as soon as it starts to go into our mouths or our eyes, so that stops us getting infections there. And then if we were to eat something that had these germs on it, we have a very strong hydrochloric acid within our stomach that will actually kill a lot of those pathogenic substances. So there's a lot that goes on that we don't know about that will stop us feeling poorly in any way, shape or form. And that's our first line of defence. Okay, so moving on to the second line of defence, which is around our white blood cell response. So most people will be able to correlate their immune system with white blood cells. So white blood cells are white, like the analogy I used just now with the splinter. You can actually see them sometimes surrounding an area because they are white in colour. So unlike the red blood cells, which are bright red because they're full of haemoglobin, white blood cells are white, and hence the name. So once these white blood cells are made in the bone marrow, some of them are stored in the spleen, and a high proportion of them are travelling around in the bloodstream. So I like to call that the highway of the body. It's where all these substances are circling around doing the work they need to do to maintain optimal health. So on the right hand side, you'll see that there's what's called a stem cell. So this is a cell basically in its purest form before it turns into any other type of cell. So these are cells that are largely within the bone marrow. And the diagram basically shows how each cell changes to become a different type of cell within the body. So the same as stem cells produce red blood cells, also produce platelets, and also produce white blood cells. So it just shows that mechanism for how these cells transform into what we need them to do in there. And the reason I put this in was to show you really the difference that is produced from the single cell. So you can have something that's function is to carry oxygen around in the body, like the red blood cells, to platelets, which are involved in the clotting mechanism that forms a scab, to something that actually fights disease proactively, like the white blood cells. Now, of that white blood cell category, there's many different types. So the immune response is something that is really very complicated. Although we understand a lot about it, there's still loads of research going on about how all these substances communicate with each other, how they work as a team to fight infection, and all kinds of different, really complicated processes about how they're working together. So just to kind of bring that to life a little bit more, some of the types of white blood cells you can have are lymphocytes, monocytes, basophils, neutrophils, phagocytes, which are one of my favourites, so call me a science geek here. But the reason why you've got Pac-Man there at the bottom of the screen is not because I'm showing my age, that I remember this kind of 80s computer game, but phagocyte, which is a type of white blood cell, actually what it does is literally goes around eating pathogenic substances. So it engulfs itself around an antigen or a pathogenic substance and literally engulfs it and then breaks it down within itself. And it literally just goes around your body doing that. So it's quite a nice analogy to imagine. Some of the others, what they do, you have some that literally highlight, they literally hold up a little bit of evidence to say, hey, look, other white blood cell, come over here and destroy this. There's some that produce chemical messages to other white blood cells, saying to them of how to act, how to come and get round to produce it. There's some that literally produce substances that will kill bacteria or viruses as soon as they get into contact with them. So many different mechanisms and ways in which they work, which I'll bring to life to you a little bit more later as well, and the reasons why that's important in our understanding of immunity and how you build your immunity as well. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's a lot unknown about the immune system, but some of the things that we do know that are really good and well correlated with a healthy immune system are having a healthy lifestyle. So we know, for instance, that regular exercise is correlated with having a low incidence of illnesses. So a couple of reasons for that could be true is that one, it maintains our body in optimum health so that it can work most effectively. There's also the argument around circulation, that exercise was boosting our blood circulation, so we're allowing all these white blood cells and substances that help with our immune response to go around the body at a pace where they can act much more quickly. So lots of different ways that some of which are still being studied as to why exercise is shown to correlate with immunity. We also know that a lower intake of alcohol is good for immunity. We know that not smoking is linked to having a good immune system. So part of the reason for this is that those little cilia hairs that line the upper respiratory tract, which I mentioned earlier, they're actually destroyed by cigarette smoke. So they literally take away that whole first line of defence of the little hair cells that are lining your airways that catch that bacteria. So that's allowing all those pathogenic substances to go into your lungs, and by that point they've entered your body, and your body will start an immune response and you'll start to feel poorly because of that. So good advice, good reason to not smoke. So a balanced diet, so having one that's obviously got enough protein in it is important, because antibodies are made from proteins, as are a lot of white blood cells and all the substances that are involved within those mechanisms, but also one that's high in fruit and veg. So one of the reasons for that is the vitamin C content. Now, vitamin C has been shown to boost your immune system and its ability to act. And one of the things that it also does is it strengthens cell membranes so that viruses are less able to get into those cells. So the way viruses work is they literally attach to a cell and they inject their DNA into the cell, which obviously kills the cell, as we know, but also then the virus reproduces within that cell to create loads more viruses that burst out. So by having a diet that's rich in vitamin C, you're allowing those cell membranes that surround all our cells to be less penetrable to viruses. So we also know that sleep is good for immune system. So that's our restorative sleep, where we're actually growing and repairing. So we know that's good. We know that having less stress in our lives is good for immunity. So there's a lot of medical research that's still going on around stress. And obviously it's hard to isolate stress, because it looks different in different people. But there's definitely evidence that if you are less stressed, your immune system is better able to work. So this could be because stress inhibits some of the mechanisms around the immune response that need to take place. And we also know that good hydration, so a hydrated body, is one that can function most effectively. We talked about this a little bit in some of our earlier webinars about the importance of hydration on the brain and the brain's ability to work. But here it's also important for that immune response as well. So the fluid, obviously, that's in our plasma allows all the white blood cells to travel around in it freely. So if we become dehydrated, then those white blood cells are less able to travel as fast and smoothly around the body. So micronutrients that I've mentioned here. So these are vitamins and minerals. So I spoke about one of them, which was vitamin C. There's also vitamin B6, so this is vital to support a lot of the biochemical reactions of the immune response. So this is in foods such as chicken, salmon, green vegetables and chickpeas. There's vitamin E, which is a powerful antioxidant, so that helps your body to fight off infection. And vitamin E is found in nuts, seeds, spinach, substances like that as well. So they're the kind of three main vitamins that are important to immunity. So vitamin C, vitamin B6 and vitamin E there. So also in brackets I've put here about gut bacteria, echinacea, green tea and wheatgrass. So these are often batted around a lot when we talk about immunity, but currently there's not enough evidence around in the scientific research that's been done to prove that they actually boost immunity in a beneficial way. So although we could say, for instance, that some of them help increase the number of white blood cells, we don't know, for instance, that that's improving the whole mechanism around the complicated processes and ways in which these work. So there may be more, for instance, they may create more white blood cells, but are those white blood cells actually working? Are they doing their job, or are they, just sitting there? So because there's so many processes involved, there's not enough evidence around these substances to say whether they make a difference or not. So they're good for you, it's why not? But do take with a bit of a pinch of caution some of the advice around some of these substances, particularly herbs and things like that. There's a lot of information and products on the internet that claim that this amazing herb will boost your immunity, and there's enough there that we do know, that I've covered within these slides, that you can do without splashing out a load of cash, that will enable your immune system to work most optimally. So just really wanted to mention those with a bit of word of caution, really. Okay, so obviously we're a little bit limited for time with these talks, but wanted to cover really as much as possible within the time to cover immunity. So we've looked at an introduction to immunity. So we looked at what it is and our defence against pathogenic, so there's disease-causing microorganisms that are all around us. We've looked at our first line of defence. So we've looked at the importance of our skin, our tears, our stomach acid, of little hair cells known as cilia that line the airways, of mucus that helps to capture a lot of these pathogenic substances before we even know that we've got anything wrong with us. A lot of these processes are taking place to ensure that we don't get ill. So we also looked at our second line of defence, so the work of the white blood cells. So we know that there's a number of different types of white blood cells that all work in different ways to signal to our body that there's a foreign substance and it needs to act. And they act by going around and literally destroying those substances. So some will attach themselves to those disease-causing substances and cause them to disintegrate and be destroyed. Others, like the little Pac-Man analogy, the phagocytes will literally go round through the process of what's called phagocytosis and actually eat up all those disease-causing items in the body. So we also looked at ways you can boost your immunity. So ways of really staying healthy, making sure we've got a good balance of food substances within our diet, a nice broad varied diet rich in both vitamin C and other trace minerals and vitamins, and also the importance of having proteins within our diet, the importance of not smoking, limiting our alcohol intake, of just staying well in ourselves generally, and trying to get enough sleep and not be stressed. So I hope you found that informative. Please do get in touch if you've got any questions. We have an inbox, hello@wearewellbeing.co.uk, where you can send us any questions about this, or if you wanted to know anything further, or want any more elaborate information around immunity that we can help with, then please do get in touch with us there. So thank you again, and look forward to hearing from you.